Bienvenue. خوش اومدید. Willkommen. Bienvenidos. Marhaba. Funyang. And welcome to our very first webinar series on cultural heritage and the Sustainable Development Goals. We're delighted and honored that you could join us today. Our webinar series aims to integrate cultural heritage into the SDGs, and the focus of today's webinar is SDG11. Inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable cities. The presentations today will address all three pillars of sustainable development: society, economy, and environment, as well as the fourth pillar, culture. My name is Linda Shatabi, and I'm a member of the ICOMOS SDG Working Group, focusing on heritage policy and environmental sustainability. And together with Stacey Vallis, who is a board member of ICOMOS New Zealand and the emerging professional member of the Climate Change and Heritage Working Group, we'll be moderating the webinar today. It's my pleasure and privilege to very briefly introduce our esteemed speakers. Peter Phillips, chair of ICOMOS Sustainable Development Goals Working Group, will kick off our event. Peter is an architect and a founding member of the ICOMOS International Scientific Committee on Energy and Sustainability, and a member of the ICOMOS Climate Change and Heritage Working Group, which produced the landmark 2019 report, The Future of Our Past, Engaging Cultural Heritage in Climate Action. More recently, Peter has been a contributing member to the update of the World Heritage Committee policy document on climate change and World Heritage. Next, we'll have Ege Yıldırım. Ege is the ICOMOS focal point for the SDGs. She's an urban planner specializing in heritage conservation and management, working in Turkey and internationally. Her work focuses on cultural heritage policy, advocacy, and governance, as well as UNESCO World Heritage and sustainable development. She is an independent consultant and the heritage site manager and of the historic guild town of Moderna, a UNESCO World Heritage candidate. Next, hopefully, will be Klaus-Peter Echter. Klaus-Peter is an architect, urban planner, and sociologist, and the president of the International Committee on Historic Cities, Towns, and Villages, CIVI for short. Previously, he has served as a member of the World Heritage Panel for ICOMOS and is currently a member of Europa Nostra. His focus is on sustainable development of historic cities, and he specializes in urban conservation and has published many books and articles on architectural history and urban monument preservation. Our final speaker is Jordi Pasqual, the coordinator of the Culture Committee at United Cities and Local Government, UCLG for short. UCLG is the global network of cities and local governments, and the work of the committee is based on Culture 21 Action, which is the most complete toolkit on culture in sustainable cities. Jordi specializes in cultural policies, sustainable development, and international cooperation. He's been a member of the jury for European Capital of Culture and teaches cultural rights and cultural policy. Finally, Dmitry Pant, a heritage management specialist who has contributed to the preparation of several World Heritage nomination dossiers, site and conservation management plans, and heritage impact assessments, and has experience in Asian, European, Middle Eastern, and North American context. As an expert member of ICOMOS CV, will be answering your questions on Facebook. Before we start though, a few housekeeping tips. I would appreciate it if you would mute your microphones and maybe turn off your videos during the presentations. That will help with bandwidth issues and it will stop disruptions from noise. For security reasons, please provide your full name and affiliation so we know who you are. We'll be having a Q&A session at the end, so please do put your comments and questions in the chat box. If you'd like to address your question to a particular speaker, I'd appreciate it if you would indicate that in your comments. Alternatively, you can watch this webinar via Facebook Live at the ICOMOS International Facebook page, where you can also ask your questions there in the chat box. A quick word of gratitude to our fabulous and hardworking coordinating team, Gabe, Fatiha, Roberta, Paolo, Fergus, Maureen, and Eva, without whom this event would not be possible. Peter Phillips, the virtual floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Bonjour, bonsoir, wherever you are. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the first webinar of the series organised by the ICOMOS Sustainable Development Goals SDG Working Group. I want to begin, as we do here in Australia, by acknowledging the traditional owners of the countries on which we meet. I am on the country of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, which covers the Greater Sydney District. I acknowledge and recognise the continuing connection of all First Nation people to their land, waters and culture, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. As they well know, if we care for country, it will care for us. For those not familiar with ICOMOS, the International Council on Monuments and Sites, we are the preeminent global association of cultural heritage professionals of every kind. ICOMOS has now approaching 11,000 members throughout the world, both individuals and institutions, more than 100 national committees, around 30 international scientific committees, and a number of working groups, including the SDG Working Group. Our headquarters and secretariat are based in Paris, and you can see it behind me. One of our roles is as an advisory body to the World Heritage Committee, but we do not just deal with World Heritage. Our members are engaged with all the heritage places of the world, and we are increasingly aware that cultural heritage and natural heritage are not separate, but part of a continuous spectrum of the things we value. Now, as some of you will know, heritage was not considered as an issue in the United Nations Millennium Development Goals and was also missing from the initial draft of the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Agenda. Through the efforts of a number of ICOMOS members and others, the conservation of cultural and natural heritage was finally included under Goal 11, Make Cities and Human Settlements Inclusive, Safe, Resilient and Sustainable. And this was Target 11.4, Strengthen efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage. While this was an important step forward, ICOMOS and its partners recognised that the role of culture, and specifically cultural heritage, should be recognised throughout all of the SDGs as an integral part and indeed a driver of sustainable development. The SDG Working Group was formed in 2017 to coordinate ICOMOS responses to all of the SDGs and to support their integration into the work of ICOMOS members at the local and regional level. Our webinar today focuses on Goal 11 as the starting point for the integration of heritage into the SDGs. Future webinars in this series will look in more detail at the 5 Ps of sustainable development: people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnerships, and the role of culture and cultural heritage in fostering all of these concepts. May I welcome you all to our webinar once again, and hope that you will be both stimulated and empowered to do your part in making a genuinely sustainable future for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I would now like to ask Dr. Ege Yildirim to please present her presentation. I will stop share so that she may start her presentation.
Thank you so much, Linda. Let me do my screen sharing for you indeed. Just a second. Yes, can you see all fine?
Yes.
All right. So here we are today. Greetings from Istanbul, where I'm personally based, but we all feel based around the world on a virtual cloud of our community. It's still very exciting to address you today after so many webinars and speeches. It's just special to have this audience, which is predominantly our ICOMOS colleagues, but many more perhaps. So welcome everybody. I would like to indeed thank all our planning team and organizing team to make this possible. It's a true honor to talk about the SDGs and our working group's work to you today. So I've been the coordinator of this working group as the ICOMOS focal point for the SDGs for a few years now, and I'll give you an overview of what we've been doing today. So let me go on to the next slide. There we go. So the contents I'll try to cover is, of course, an introduction to the SDGs themselves, how ICOMOS has been involved, what our working group looks like, what we do, our highlights from our activities, and an evaluation of our progress and what still lies ahead for us. Peter already gave a very nice and concise introduction to how we're positioned in ICOMOS. And today SDG11 will be a little bit more the focus of our webinar, but I will try to stay a little bit more in the broad framework of things. I suppose nobody has now not heard of the SDGs or the Agenda for Sustainable Development, the UN 2030 Agenda, which came after the MDGs for the previous 15 years. The Millennium Development Goals are now the Sustainable Development Goals, and this agenda is a plan of action for people, planet, prosperity, plus for peace and partnerships. And the 17 goals, which are expanded from the 8 MDGs of the previous period, cover really everything under the sun that human societies face as challenges today. The 17 goals, the headings of which you can see here, also have 169 targets below them, and 11.4 being one of them under the cities target. And now actually after the first 5 years of getting galvanized, excited, motivated to actually deliver some of these goals by 2030, we've already come to 1/3 of the time. In the remaining 10 years, we have realized we need to accelerate this action, and the UN Decade of Action kicked off at the beginning of this year, 2020. And what a kickoff to 2020 it was, wasn't it? A big message from nature for us with COVID this year. But this is all making our work more meaningful, to be honest. So let's continue. So the plan of action of the 2030 agenda, what is it really about? Perhaps it's really just, it's about a more just world, a more equitable world. So human rights lies at the center, and a lot of human rights concerns and scope is actually overlapping with the SDGs. It's about inclusiveness, and vulnerable groups are really emphasized here, leaving no one behind, and especially helping the ones who are least left at the farthest behind are the priorities of the UN 2030 agenda. We already talked about the 5 pillars, which you could also call as spheres or dimensions of this equation: the society, economy, environment. And we really believe that culture needs to figure much more visibly and strongly in this. At the moment, there are certain thematic UN agendas, the new urban agenda, agenda that is very related to SDG 11.4, of course, the climate action agenda, the COP25, the Paris Agreement, for which we have another working group, the disaster framework, the Sendai, the framework for disaster risk reduction, and the Addis Ababa Forum for Financing for Development. So the urban one, we are very much following indeed, as well as climate, but actually it is all one holistic system. And that's what actually we have been learning. Our experience is how to widen our vision, how to widen our practices so that we see the connections between what we do and the rest of life, the rest of what society cares about. So all of these themes are important for us now. And one other critical issue in the SDGs is actually it looks so abstract and broad to people. What have I got to do with it? How do you actually localize it to the grassroots, to what's happening on the ground in real life? It is indeed a challenge which was encountered in the MDGs. And so localizing has been a key work stream within the policy platform of Agenda 2030, how to localize this from international, national, subnational, national, local, individual level. We all have our part to play. So there are certain official mechanisms that the UN actors and meetings are addressing, but this is not an agenda for UN to care about only. The themes are universal, and they're actually part and parcel of our daily lives, and this needs to be made more explicit in everybody's work, including ours. And how do you implement in an effective way by tracking your progress? Monitoring is another key word. We have indicators for each of the 169 targets that have been identified. There is one for 11.4, of course, which is basically based on expenditure for heritage conservation, but there's a lot more other work going on developing indicators. And every year, the UN High-Level Political Forum gathers at the HLPF to review progress on the SDGs. The one main mechanism is the national inputs, the VNRs. Now local inputs are rising, coming to the fore, as well as thematic and agency inputs. You can all find information on this at the link provided here, sustainabledevelopment.un.org. So how does culture and cultural heritage feature in this? Yes, we have target 11.4, recognizing the world's cultural and natural heritage. But we also see 4.7, education for a culture and peace and cultural diversity, 8.9 and 12.B, which focus on sustainable tourism and local culture. But the closer we look, the more connections we see with many other goals. So part of our work stream is really going farther and farther into all the goals where and how we may actually relate culture and heritage into it. But of course, having an anchor, having the actual 11.4 iterated, written expressly in the policy document is a huge win for us. And it's an entry point for a lot of lobbying, a lot of demands, a lot of work. And we're not just starting from scratch. We have a legacy. UNESCO has been working on this for some decades, and the UN has resolutions on culture and development since some years now. But we still see there's more to be done for what we feel is the full integration and impact of culture in the agenda. We are demanding more visibility in the next agenda setting. So thus we have a campaign that ICOMOS is part of the Culture 2030 goal. And we need to use crisp and compelling messages about why cultural heritage is relevant, why all actors need to consider cultural heritage within the sustainable development process. And here we have already some good doctrine to build on that ICOMOS has started to produce in 2011. The Paris Declaration for Heritage as a Driver of Development already expressly said that cultural heritage is not just monuments, it's identity, memory, sense of place, and so much more for sustainable urbanization. So where is ICOMOS positioned in this global agenda? We find ourselves well positioned to play a leading role as the primary global NGO, which has been developing a consistent portfolio of doctrine. We are building on the legacy of the Paris Declaration with new documents. We have an enormous network of experts. You who are listening to us today, we are all an enormous resource, actually, an enormous network of knowledge, of ideas, of solutions that need to be harnessed for more better sustainable development policies and practice. And we reiterate in every annual meeting of ICOMOS now that the 2030 agenda is imperative, it's transformative, and we are transforming the framework of how we protect cultural heritage ourselves. So the SDG Working Group, as Peter said, was officially named as such in 2017 after 2 years of existence as a task force set up by our previous chairs and coordinators, our focal points. We are almost 130 members now with ex officio individual expert and committee representatives. You can see here the ratios of our committee representation, and we would like to actually fill this gap. So this is one point where we will need your help wherever you can. We are gathering committee representatives so that the working group has a better transversal representation and coordination across the different thematic working groups by ISCs, by national committees in ICOMOS. We have more task teams for our priority actions. We have certain documents that we base our work on, the concept note of 2016 and the action plan of 2017. These are all available on our webpage for the SDG Working Group. And focusing a little bit more on the action plan, this was formed in a participatory way after our Istanbul meeting in February 2017, where we established some principles for ICOMOS about, for example, effective language of communication, the universality of heritage, importance of partnerships, of diversity, of the culture-nature connection, for example. There are 3 action areas that we organize our activities around: mobilizing ourselves, developing partnerships, localizing, so providing guidance for local practices, and monitoring, supporting the development of indicators for progress. And from this, we also went on to identify a smaller number of priority projects that we now follow since 2018. And the vision of the action plan is really the recognition and mainstreaming of cultural heritage as a driver and enabler of sustainable development. So our activities have a lot of organizing and advocacy components in them. And here the mainstreaming works both ways. You know, we are mainstreaming heritage into sustainable development and mainstreaming sustainable development into heritage. It's a two-way process. We value transversality because sustainability is everywhere. Everything we do is now about sustainability. So that is an interesting point about sharing the load. The working group is not the only place where SDGs happen. We are trying to make sure that, you know, this is across the board in ICOMOS. Collaborations with other working groups and ISCs are key, of course, as well as building external partnerships. We have our mailing list, our periodic meetings, reports to the ICOMOS leadership organs. We provide inputs to UN policy documents, and we give presentations and advice to various scientific meetings through our membership who are delegated for this, or we have discussion groups after which some documents come out and we share these. So it's a lot of paperwork really, but sometimes in the pre-COVID days there used to be very exciting meetings, very inspirational meetings where we really got inspired by each other about the importance of our work for humanity, you could even say. And publicity materials in all forms, info leaflets, and social media, of course, are important tools for us. This is just a list highlighting the many different types of events that the SDGs have been involved in. So there are many requests coming in to ICOMOS that are forwarded to our group, and we try to respond by delegating the appropriate colleagues for this. So there's more, but I just wanted to give you some of the more interesting highlights. The Google Arts and Culture Initiative, for example, is upcoming. That will be very interesting, and I invite you to watch out for that Google Arts story. That will be soft launched, hopefully in the coming weeks. Well, a special project, let's say, after COVID broke out, was how we use social media in particular more effectively now, because that's our main medium of communication these days. So there, we prepared info bites for the April 18th International Day of Monuments and Sites, with messages on how heritage through urban open spaces can provide comfort and health for the communities, how tourism is transforming itself, how rural and local tourism is now gaining importance. And we tried our hand at linguistic diversity in this case, which we would love to do more often, but it's always a challenge, something, an ICOMOS principle we try to abide better by. Then we have several key priority action areas, number one of which is the new upcoming SDGs policy guidance. We've been working on this for about 1.5 to 2 years now, and Linda, my dear Linda, is here as part of the task team. We have been actively working and producing a zero draft for a new type of document. It's a practical guidance for policymakers and other stakeholders. So how do you actually link every SDG to cultural heritage? We are trying to form a robust scientific resource. It's based on ICOMOS doctrine, but it's easily understandable, communicable in streamlined, strong statements that different stakeholders can take and think about and build on. So this is our aspiration, for which we hope to launch the final draft, the first edition, early next year, if all goes according to plan. Secondly, the UN High-Level Political Forum, the highest level of the SDG implementation, has been a large working sphere for us. We've been joining the annual SDG reviews since 2018, so it's our third year now. We've organized side events, participated in side events, issued a manifesto about whether heritage is left behind. If we're leaving no one behind, why should heritage be left behind either? The Culture 2030 Goal campaign that we're part of proudly, and we have Jordi today with us, who is coordinating on behalf of UCLG this campaign. The Culture 2030 Goal campaign issued an interesting report, which ICOMOS was tasked with coordinating. I was the main writer for this. We analyzed how culture figures in the implementation documents of the 2030 agenda. Some really interesting results came out of that, and highlighting how culture has certain gaps that need to be filled, for sure. During the COVID-19 times, we issued a Culture COVID-19 statement, which was endorsed by the President of the United Nations General Assembly. And we had just a press release yesterday on the occasion of the United Nations 75th anniversary, which is happening this week. The UN General Assembly is happening this week. We've just launched our highlights video of the side event from this year's HLPF, which was virtual, of course. So this is one area. Well, localizing, we are talking how important it is, for sure. We need to do more of this, for sure. And we've been exploring how some committees are doing exemplary work. The representation is very important for information exchange between ISC work and our working group's work. Ireland has been very active in this. They built very good relations with the Irish government around the 2030 agenda. India has had a very important protocol with a university on rights-based approaches and sustainable development goals. The Underwater Cultural Heritage Committee is actively engaged in the Decade of Ocean Science. We have ICORP on the road and many more, really. And it's a very interesting discovery that we do so much on SDGs that we are not even aware of. So one task seems to be recognizing what we do as SDG work and formulating it and expressing it as such. Moving on. I'm a little behind time, 19 minutes, apologies. I think I'm going to go over time about 3 minutes, Linda, Gabe, if you don't mind. For World Heritage, we've been following the committee sessions for several years now. We do have to share with you one diagnosis, let's say, that sustainable development is mentioned in the World Heritage Committee discussions in a very strange way. I mean, the interpretation of sustainable development sometimes is not really aligned with OUV protection. So how do we reconcile these things? How do we protect the outstanding universal value while addressing sustainable development concerns? So we are trying to monitor and make some commentary that is shareable in the near future. Urban partnerships, which is going to be the focus of the next two presentations today, are very key, of course. UCLG has been a very close ally for us. We've been attending their culture summits and other campaigns and projects. UN Habitat, the UN Agency for Sustainable Urbanism. We've been participating in various platforms that they have set up, the World Urban Campaign and Forum. We've just signed a memorandum of understanding with UN Habitat. And during COVID-19, we've also participated in some of their webinars. For metrics and indicators, which is much more really the remit of the UNESCO Institute for Statistics and the UNESCO World Heritage Center, ICOMOS has been supporting their indicator development workshops for the new Culture 2030 thematic indicators. And we've also tried to take lessons on how to apply this monitoring mechanism to ourselves. So last year, we had a US ICOMOS intern, Anasha Srinivasan, who prepared a very interesting, wonderful report on ICOMOS and measuring the SDGs and how we actually contribute to 11.4 through expenditure, whether or not it's a meaningful indicator. And what we did find out actually is ICOMOS contributes in ways that are not easy to measure. It's not monetary always. The voluntary expenditure that we spend, all of us put in for ICOMOS, if we did a very rough projection, it more or less comes to 2.5 times the actual money spent for our projects. So measuring something is tricky. It's not always easy to quantify, or you have to find the right units and mechanisms of measurement. So, but this was also a very good exercise for self-assessment and asking ourselves questions about how do we do our budgets, how do we evaluate our projects, how do we report to these through the annual reports. So we hope to continue this reporting system actually. So looking at the challenges ahead, or what lessons we draw from this, you can see that we've been quite busy in this working group, but have we really achieved our aims in a meaningful way? Well, it's never enough. We do find that there is increasing awareness and participation about sustainable development related issues among ourselves. There's more needed. We have become much more visible in the international policy arenas. We would need to leverage this weight that we've created into more concrete projects at all levels. Our policy guidance will help in this. And localizing, we will need to do better. Every ISC, the relevant goals that their thematic subjects correspond to, they will need to be more active and build national partnerships and compile better case studies as evidence of this. So there's a lot of communication work here, as previously said. There are divides to be bridged between theory and practice, between the high level and grassroots, between what's heritage or non-heritage. And we have to understand and communicate messages and create new synergies. Usually it's a little bit out of our comfort zone. So listening to differing views and being open-minded and humble, I suppose. And for all of us, we can be SDGs ambassadors in ICOMOS. So everybody's invited if you're not already feeling you're doing enough. We have the action plan for you to review. You can see about your committee's representation in the working group. You can look at your expenditure patterns and reporting patterns, and you can be a heritage ambassador in your development sustainability circles around you. And think about how your work connects with the SDGs. How is your heritage practice engaging with and contributing to society, economy, environment, peace, and much more? So I think that's it. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll discuss more with your questions. And apologies for going over time, Linda, Gabe.
Thank you so much, Ege. Really appreciate it. That was a lovely presentation. Lots of things to think about. Our next presenter will be Dr. Klaus-Peter Echter, who is the president of the International Committee on Historic Cities, Towns, and Villages. Klaus-Peter?
Thank you very much for the invitation, and I am speaking now about ICOMOS CV and the sustainable development of historic cities. First slide.
What is Zoom without a few technical glitches?
Oh yeah, thank you very much. What is CV? CV is one of 30 scientific committees, international scientific committees of ICOMOS. Next slide. This is the content of my speech. I have 5 points. The first one is, what do ICOMOS and CV say about urban heritage? Secondly, key doctrinal texts and events. Thirdly, resilience of historic cities in times of COVID-19. Fourth point, what kind of partnership does ICOMOS build with urban actors? And the fifth and last one is historic urban landscape. Next slide. The first, what do ICOMOS and CV say about urban heritage? CV and urban heritage. The aims of CV, which we have in our bylaws, the ICOMOS ISC on historic cities, towns and villages researches and promotes the understanding, protection, conservation, urban planning and management of historic cities, towns, villages and urban areas. CV promotes its concerns and approaches, particularly defined by Washington Charter of 1987 and the Valletta Principles of 2011. Next slide. This is the title of the Valletta Principles. The Valletta Principles reflect a great awareness of the issue of historic heritage on a regional scale, rather than just confined to urban areas, of intangible values such as continuity and identity, of traditional land use, the role of public space in communal interactions, and of other socioeconomic factors such as integration and environmental factors. Next slide. Historic cities, towns, and urban areas are spatial structures that express the evolution of a society and of its cultural identity. Historical or traditional areas form part of daily human life. Their protection and integration into contemporary society as a basis for town planning and land development. And CV's core position is to link safeguarding and preservation to economic and social development in the context of sustainability, and to adapt historic cities and urban areas to modern lifestyles, and to assure inhabitants' welfare. Next slide. Key doctrinal texts and events. I like to highlight the seminal role of CV in instilling an understanding of the need to engage in sustainable development debates by ICOMOS. The scientific meetings and charters especially laid the technical groundwork. Our last president, Sofia Afgereniu Colonias, was very important in this aspect. This is a CV position paper, the Valletta position paper on historic cities and sustainable urban development policies. This is a resolution of Malta in 2010, and it's about sustainable development. I quote two aspects of this resolution. Historic cities possess numerous attitudes that characterize today's concept of the sustainable city. They were rooted in their natural environments and adapted to them climatically, were often densely built and closely knit, which limited the need for heavy and complex infrastructure and transportation systems, and were functionally and socially mixed and embodied multiple cultural values. Historic cities may be seen as an archetype for seeking sustainability. They minimize the use of resources, favor interaction and solidarity, and secure cultural continuity. They could serve as a source of inspiration for defining policies for sustainable urban development. And they will serve as a source of inspiration. Next slide, please. From the sustainable preservation to sustainability. These are the resolutions of the General Assemblies of ICOMOS to this, and I think Ege has told about this. The first one was heritage as a driver of development, and then the two other resolutions in Florence in 2014, 18th General Assembly, and we also discussed this in our General Assembly in Delhi, and CV supported these resolutions both in Delhi and also in Florence. And we should also mention the annual meeting of CV in 2012 in Naples. There was also a World Urban Forum, and on this World Urban Forum, three international and scientific committees were discussing this sustainable development problem. The first one was the Economic Scientific Committee, the second one was ICLAFI, and the third one, of course, was CV. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Hello?
There's
There might be a
small technical problem with the slide presentation, so just a few seconds.
I have the present slides as well. If you'd like me to screen share, that's the plan B.
But it's okay. This slide is about CV annual meetings and sustainable development. I just referred that we discussed sustainable development in our annual meeting in Naples, but specifically in our annual meeting in Greece in 2015, organized by our President Sofia Afgerinou-Kolonias, and also very intensively in 2016 our Seoul meeting. Both meetings have been published. The meeting in Syros online, and the Seoul meeting as a paper publication. Thank you. Next slide. Yeah, these are the Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide. With Goal 11, make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. You always are listening to this. And as a target 11.4, strengthen efforts to protect and safeguard the world cultural and natural heritage, which is very important for my speech. The target 11.4 distinguishes itself as the only target dedicated to a cultural theme, thus serving as the anchor of much cultural heritage work. Although this does not preclude the relevance of other targets in the full spectrum of the SDGs. Closely relevant to SDG 11.4, the new urban agenda NUA, adopted by the UN Human Settlements Program, UN Habitat, in its Summit Habitat 3 in 2016, lays out how cities should be managed sustainably and features several references to cultural heritage. Next slide, please. ICOMOS and the Sustainable Development is the vision. The recognition, mainstreaming, and effective contribution of cultural heritage as a driver and enabler of sustainable development in the process of implementing the United Nations Agenda 2030 and Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide. The role of heritage within the UN SDG. Culture with three important aspects. Cultural heritage as enabler of social cohesion and inclusion. Secondly, cultural heritage and creativity as a driver for equity and inclusive economic development. And third one, cultural heritage and historic quarters of cities can improve livability, resilience, and sustainability. Next slide, please. These aspects have been also mentioned in the ICOMOS concept note from 2016. This concept note has been written mostly by 4 members of ICOMOS. The focal point of the Sustainable Development Goals, Jyoti Hosograha, and also Andrew Potts, and also the focal point for World Urban Campaign, Jeff Zuhl. And now we are coming to the new urban agenda. The new urban agenda, which is closely connected to the Sustainable Development Goals. Half of humanity lives in cities today. 95% of urban expansion in the next decades will take place in the developing world. The world cities occupy just 3% of the Earth's land, but account for 60 to 80% of energy consumption and 75% of carbon emissions. Rapid urbanization is exerting pressure on freshwater supplies, sewage, the living environment, and public health. But of course, there's also the high density of cities can bring efficiency gains and technological innovation while reducing resource and energy consumption. So please, the next slide. Third point, the resilience of historic cities in times of COVID-19. This webinar it has been recorded, and here you see the link of this recorded webinar, and you can find the link on my website and also on the website of the Facebook group of CV. On 16 June this year, a CV webinar, Resilience of Historic Cities in Times of COVID-19, took place. It was organized by Rugile Gionine and Mario Santana and me. There were high-level panelists, Michael Turner, Pierluigi Sacco, and Elizabeth Wines, I know that she is here listening, discussed the impacts on historic cities by the COVID-19, resilience, economic and cultural impacts, the civil society, communities, SDGs, and UA. Around 400 people expressed their interest in joining the webinar. This webinar dealt with the issue of how the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development of the United Nations is transforming our world. COVID-19. It is obvious we cannot really know about the future development of the pandemic. There are fear and insecurity, emotions, many theories in this unprecedented crisis caused by the COVID-19 virus. We are anxious that heritage will not belong to political priorities. The COVID-19 epidemic is urging all cities to provide immediate responses to a global crisis that threatens not only the health of the population, but the economy, the infrastructure, and the social cohesion of the human settlements. Michael Turner, the professor of the Academy of Arts and Design in Jerusalem, spoke about the main challenges and possible solutions to ensure the resilience of historic cities in terms of COVID-19. And what does resilience mean? He explained resilience as an integrative process with the social, environmental, and economic components, meeting the challenges of social inclusion, the digital revolution, and sustainable development. Pierluigi Sacco, professor of cultural economics at the Milano University and head of Venice office of the OECD, talked about the economic impact on historic cities of COVID-19 in longer period and the social value of culture. He analyzed the fact that we learned that the future is all about urban concentrations, the only thing that really matters in the globalized economy. But we are now in a situation that the density is a real problem, and he spoke about possibilities. CV expert member Elizabeth Wines informed about the potential of the Hull approach dealing with resilience of historic cities in this time of crisis. To her opinion, is Hull an approach to urban areas which is flexible, inclusive, and allows for long-term visionary approach. The seminar succeeded to exchange on practices and seeking examples that allow beyond theory to integrate or develop local economy issues with social and human dimensions in the heritage and cultural context. Next slide, the slide is here, so it's no, we need the slide before. Thank you. Fourth topic, what kind of partnership does ICOMOS build with urban actors? Ecke spoke also just a little bit about this. 4.1, the organization of World Heritage Cities. ICOMOS and the Organization of World Heritage Cities, WWG, with 113 World Heritage Cities as its members, renewed their Memorandum of Understanding, the MOU, during the ICOMOS 2019 Annual General Assembly in Marrakesh. You see a picture of this. The main objective of the Memorandum of Understanding, which was first signed in 2013, is to establish a framework to foster collaboration between the WWG and ICOMOS in different fields, including research and development of improved methods for the conservation and management of World Heritage Cities. Recently, the WWG has published on its website the activities of the municipalities of member cities in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. Thanks to the renewal of this cooperation, ICOMOS and the WWG will work in particular through the CV on the themes of preservation and development of World Heritage Cities and through other committees, working groups and focal points. 4.2, ICOMOS on partnership for cultural heritage and sustainable development with UN Habitat. Next slide, please. ICOMOS had a strong presence at the 10th session of the World Urban Forum in Abu Dhabi in February 2020, convened by UN Habitat, aimed to consolidate their partnership in ensuring that the world's cultural heritage is protected, managed and harnessed for sustainable urban development. A MOU between UN Habitat and ICOMOS was signed on February 11, 2020 during the World Urban Forum 10. The MOU has created a wide framework for collaboration between the two organizations with a particular emphasis on urban regeneration and reconstruction, especially in the context of climate change. Here you see on this picture Ege Yildirim and also from UCLG and of course Erik Holbrecht, who is also famous, and Steve and many other very people who are cooperating on the sustainable development. 4.3, ICOMOS as an associate partner of the World Urban Campaign. The World Urban Campaign is a coalition of urban stakeholders to raise awareness about positive urban change in order to achieve sustainable cities and communities. The World Urban Campaign is coordinated by UN Habitat and currently comprises more than 200 partner organizations. Its mission is to contribute in developing solutions and take actions in cities and communities in implementing the new urban agenda to accelerate the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. Cities and urban communities are at the heart of the Decade for Action to achieve the SDGs. The World Urban Campaign promotes the implementation of the NUA, the New Urban Agenda, to achieve the SDGs. It does so through a set of principles and drivers of change as defined in the city we need. ICOMOS has also a strong partnership for sustainable development with United Cities and local governments, the UCLG, but this is topic of the next speech. The fifth and the last point is historic urban landscape. Please, next slide.
A quick point, 1 minute.
Okay. The HAL recommendation is an approach or tool and process for assisting in the management of cultural urban heritage and not a category of place. And now I have two cases. Please, next slide. The case of Tomonoro. In Japan, it is a seaside town where a freeway had been proposed, which essentially would have destroyed the town. After a long debate, a controversial decision has been made not to allow that freeway because it would have caused a disruption to this particular town. And so this was a success of this process. In the mentioned CV webinar, Elizabeth Wines gave a report about the HAL model with different steps. I only refer 2 or 3, to undertake comprehensive surveys and mapping of the city's natural, cultural and human resources, to assess vulnerability of these attributes to socioeconomic stresses, to integrate urban heritage values and their vulnerability status into a wider framework of city development. And the next 2 slides, the last ones. The resilient neighborhoods. In neighborhoods, values which contribute to city resilience and city livability. Resilient neighborhoods in neighborhoods where we live and where we are connected to these places, and that they are accessible and that we can inhabit the streets in a safe way, which we all having to readjust and reassess about how we share public places. The last one. Last slide, please. City livabilities. But these are the sort of images of cities that are safe and resilient and work because people occupy them and are engaged in daily activities in them. And these steps are a useful guide and can be localized. These are guidelines to better integrate urban heritage conservation into strategies of socioeconomic development and planning tools. There's a worldwide interest in this model, which is endorsed by UNESCO. It can be regarded as a helpful and appropriate recommendation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope it was not too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Klaus-Peter. That was very interesting. Lots to think about. Our final speaker is Jordi Pasquale from the United Cities and Local Governments. He is the coordinator of the Cultural Committee. Jordi, if you're ready, we're ready for you.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I am ready. I will use a PowerPoint presentation, and I kindly ask if the images are going through correctly. Can you confirm?
Yes, we can see everything. Thank you.
Good. My gratitude to ICOMOS for organizing this webinar. I will follow with lots of interest the whole series. Very good initiative. Congratulations. Also, special hello to the people in South Africa celebrating the Heritage Day. Enjoy the day. We in United Cities and Local Governments have been promoting in the last 10 years this narrative to understand our societies. We are convinced, and it is today very obvious that the triangle does not explain our societies anymore, and that we need an explicit consideration of culture as one of the pillars, dimensions, components, circles, spheres of sustainability. We need recognition as an important dimension to be explicit. We need actors to be recognized as legitimate, as giving crucial considerations for all in the shaping the future of our societies. and we need resources to make it happen. What in UCLG, what we did with this narrative, this vision, we turned it into a range of commitments, and we published in 2015, now 5 years ago, a document, a guide, a toolkit, whose name is Culture 21 Actions. Can you still see my screen? Yes. And I would say the Sustainable Development Goals were approved on the same year, in September that year. So what we did is for our members, cities and local governments all over the world, we transformed our guide with 9 commitments and 100 actions into a guide that considers explicitly the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. You can download this guide for free in several languages from our website. You see the images of Goal 1, Goal 2, we go Goal 4, goal per goal, how culture is relevant, what cities can do, and how cities are already making this effective with examples. So this is a guide in paper. You can download it very easily. Ege said that we have already spent the 5 initial years of the UN Agenda 2030. We are already at the decade of action. And here we are with the decade of action. And we are today more forced than ever to explain what we do, our poetry, the reality happening in our places, the places we live, with the pros of the 17 SDGs and the 169 targets. So in an attempt to explain the relation between the SDGs and cultural policies of cities, we came to this classification. Some goals are more related to the localization of the SDGs. Some other are more related to culture as an enabler of sustainable development. And the most obvious ones are related to culture in people-centered development. The more obvious targets for us, of course, first, the most important one, 11.4, protect and safeguard natural and cultural heritage. Ege and Klaus-Peter have mentioned other targets. Of course, for 7, also 8.9 related to sustainable tourism, 12b, which is very close to 8.9, and 8.3, which is interesting for the world of artistic sectors, working with creativity and innovation. But there are other, not very obvious targets that we may consider and use in order to connect our poetry, what we do, with the pros of the SDGs, the pros of the national plans to achieve the SDGs, the pros of the local governments' programs to achieve the SDGs, and the commitments of the civil society related to sustainable development. And these 10 are not very often considered, but they are today, where yesterday are today and will be tomorrow, key components of cultural policies at a local level. Target 10.3 on equal opportunity and reduced inequalities. Target 16.10, this was the main advocacy of our colleagues in the International Federation of Libraries, public access to information and protection of fundamental freedoms. 5.1, gender and all forms of discrimination against women and girls. 12.8, information and awareness for sustainable development and lifestyles in harmony with nature. 1714, policy coherence for sustainable development. We cannot imagine there is policy coherence unless the cultural policies are explicit and operational. 11A, relation between urban, peri-urban, and rural areas. 9.1, infrastructure. Yes, we need infrastructure in cultural policies. 1.4, access to basic services. We consider libraries, heritage centers, arts programs, basic services of citizens. Yes. 13.3, climate change, the relation between climate change and our institutions and projects. And 15.9, integration of ecosystem and biodiversity values into planning. I showed our guide before, and what we have also is an OPS database where you can search by the SDGs. So you can click in SDG 5, gender equality, and you obtain some results of our cities that have developed projects related to culture and gender. This is SDG 4, quality education. We have, of course, many on education, many on gender, and some less in some other SDGs. And what we are doing today, these days, we are transforming this guide into a workshop. We are offering the 7 Keys workshop so that cities and local governments can develop their own keys to localize the SDGs at a local level with a cultural perspective. So it's not us saying which the 7 keys are, but people participating in local workshops will decide what are the 7 transformative keys that localize with a cultural perspective the SDGs in their places. We are also, because of the pandemic, we are about to finish. We are holding an international conference next week, elaborating on the right to participate in culture. If the pandemic has shown something, is the evidence that culture is a need for people, that we cannot live without our cultural contexts, without our active participation in cultural processes, and we would like to highlight this as an antidote for the next months and years in which everything will be revised. We believe we need to be courageous and active in defending cultural rights and the right to participate in cultural life. And last but not least, what we are doing is also giving strong support to the campaign Today Culture 2030 goal, which began in 2013 with a very bold statement: we need a goal, and we can show that this goal is perfectly feasible. It is already existing in many conventions, treaties, and it needs the political courage to be accepted as something meaningful and providing more coherence to the international development agenda. It didn't happen because of various reasons, but we are, of course, accepting the frame of the SDGs. We recognize the SDGs are a step forward, but we are still critical in UCLG. We believe that this agenda needs to be bolder and giving more responsibilities to cultural actors, including heritage actors, more capacity to interact with other urban actors, more resources to do their work, and more legitimacy in addressing the key issues that our societies are experiencing. Ege mentioned the report we published in September last year, a year ago, exactly a year ago. A wonderful report that goes analyzes the reviews that the nation states submitted to the high-level political forum in 2016, 17, 18, and 19, and highlights, yes, that culture is not enough present in the national voluntary reviews. With the Culture 2030 goal, we wrote a very good statement defending the place of culture in the recovery. And I think that's all. I am extremely happy to have been able to have been invited to this webinar. We consider the partnership with ICOMOS as crucial for the future of the cause, for the future of the place of culture in sustainable development, and we are at your disposal for further information and certainly for future extended cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jordi. That was very interesting. Again, lots of things to think about. I think the upshot of all the presentations is that we collectively have the information. The key is to localize the SDGs, share information, and use it in cities throughout the world to attain the Sustainable Development Goals. We have lots of interesting questions on Zoom and Facebook. And Stacy Vallis, would you like to ask the first question?
Thanks very much, Linda. So let's start with a query from Facebook to our first speaker. So that's Dr. Ege. So the question is from Adnis El Hussein, and it is, in what way can the UNESCO World Heritage Sustainable Development Policy be better improved in order to protect the OUV of the sites?
Okay, so I will try to share a few remarks, but maybe my colleagues can help, or there might be more responses. It's a big topic, but what I can say right now is definitely this is also an underutilized policy document, I would say. The World Heritage and Sustainable Development Policy of 2015 was very comprehensively written. You know, it's very useful, and it has a lot of key concepts. Of course, it has to be elaborated in detail, and actually the next step would be working out that detail of how to put it into practice. And there have been workshops going on to do just that. My colleague Sophia Labadi from University of Kent, she's also a member of our working group. She's particularly active with her research projects on this, because there was a workshop in Brussels that was gathered especially to develop an action plan for World Heritage, Sustainable Development and civil society. So now we have actually an action plan to implement it from the civil society perspective. This was done in cooperation with the European Cultural Foundation, I think, and Europa Nostra. And then there was an Africa workshop in 2019, I think, in Robben Island Museum in South Africa with the African World Heritage Fund. Again, that was very intensive and very productive as far as I know. So, our colleagues, expert groups, or concerned civil society allies, we are working to actually develop some more tools to apply it. I suppose it just needs to keep gathering visibility. These documents, they always run the risk of being forgotten on a shelf unless they have some very sustainable, let's say, mechanism of making them, applied in real life circumstances. This policy document is actively promoted by a group, but I think perhaps we are a little bit on the academic side of this, or maybe individual museum or best practice institutions are doing their part, but it's perhaps not widespread enough yet. And then there's the other level of the actual committee. The committee members, the states parties, that's at a very different national government level. It's very political at that stage, and it's very difficult to actually influence or intervene. It's a very complicated mechanism. ICOMOS, as advisory body to World Heritage, we do have some tools. We advise the World Heritage Center every year with the agenda items, the documents, the reports. also with the ICOMOS advice given site by site, on inscription and nomination. The center has actually improved their periodic reporting questionnaire to include sustainable development related questions. But how well is it understood and practiced for real? That is still a big question. There's a lot of work for all of us to do. And your question is excellent, so thank you. And I don't think we can answer it properly ever right now, but it's a good food for thought.
Thank you so much, Ege. We have one more question from Facebook, and that's from Yasmin Mann. And perhaps both Klaus-Peter and Jordi can answer this question, one from a heritage perspective and another one from a city's perspective. And her question is, I reside in a 100-year-old building in Lahore College for Women University, Lahore, Pakistan. Please elaborate how we can take you on board for preparing a workable UN project for conservation. And Lahore itself is a historic city, so perhaps both Klaus-Peter and Jordi can answer this question. Perhaps Klaus-Peter, if we could start with you.
Thank you very much for this question, which is practical and therefore very important. I think it's you should start this. I understand this is a research project, and I guess you have to find partners for this, and so I would recommend you to cooperate, to collaborate with university in the near about, and also with authorities, conservationists if there are, and I think in Pakistan and in India there is a very good research or preservation system. So I think you have to join with them, and then you will they will help you in managing this project. That's my idea about this.
Thank you, Klaus-Peter. Jordi?
Yes, very difficult to answer because of the lack of knowledge of the context in which the idea and the project is operating. I perhaps supporting what Klaus-Peter has said, I could perhaps add that a brief research on similar international projects that are conceptually close to the one that you're developing may give some ideas on the kind of partnerships and the kind of narratives that they have used, and also the bottlenecks, the problems that they have faced, which are not often explained, but perhaps reading in between the lines, that's also very often very useful information. Thank you.
May I add that we have Pakistani colleagues in the working group. I can put you in touch with them. Maybe they help with something.
That would be great. Another question from Zoom. This one is from Paula Mota. And many countries around the world are putting aside money for recovery due to the COVID pandemic. And therefore, this question is open to all three of our presenters. Oops, sorry. Okay, here we go. 36% of the European Recovery Fund is oriented to support sustainability and climate change. What is your position on recovery from the climate change, the COVID pandemic, in terms of heritage, and what can be done in cities to help with recovery once we hopefully come out of this pandemic? Ege, do you want to go first?
Sure. So Yes, it's true that now there is a lot of recovery, build back better packages in discussion. Some countries are really delivering really wonderful support for their societies. And of course, as usual, we are asking, where is cultural heritage in all this, or culture in all this? There is one really good initiative that's going on with the EU, you might know of. The European Green Deal was adopted, and Europa Nostra and ICOMOS are collaborating on the cultural heritage components being advocated into the European Green Deal. And I believe in the European Parliament there have been some positive budget decisions. The EU is quite advanced about this topic, I would believe. In a lot of the COVID webinars that ICOMOS was called to speak at, at the UN Habitat Circles, etc., we tried to convey this concern that was expressed by our working group colleagues, talking about how, it might be even worse because there will be a rush to catch up with huge infrastructure investments, and this will harm even further the fragile resources of heritage we have. And we try to communicate that in all the platforms, saying, look, heritage is always valuable and vulnerable, and now it's even more so. So please, we are just trying to do our part of reminding about heritage, but perhaps we need to be more compelling or more strategic in our lobbying. So there are some wins, but I can't say the landscape is really working in our favor at the moment. Thanks.
Klaus-Peter?
Thank you for this possibility to speak about this problem, recovery. I think it's for the cities, it is important to start these projects, and of course it is important that they are supported by the European Union, and of course not only the European Union but also other federal institutions or federal governments. And I think NGOs like ICOMOS and also Europa Nostra could support these best requests for recoveries. ICOMOS is now in a very good position in the European Union because ICOMOS has done a really good research project about qualities of recoveries, which has been really which has been very good set in a very good position, because it's a really good project. And but of course, as Ege said, it's always not an easy way, because the European Union is very bureaucratic, and to get funds for this is, it's not easy, but all should try.
Thank you. Jordi, would you like to add something to the discussion?
It is a very difficult question, but we are forced to answer that question on a daily basis. And I think digitization is something that will be very much promoted with the funds allocated for the recovery, and also the relation between what we do and health. It is of course not obvious, but we need to make sure that the scientific research on it exists. The participation in cultural life allows you to have a life which is with better health and longer. we need to make sure that this scientific evidence is also in the consideration of those writing and implementing the plans. The participation in heritage activities is also contributing to health. And of course, we have to defend fundamental freedoms. Let me also add this, which is something obvious, but in a context in which freedom of speech is not warranted. The way the cultural sector, including heritage, provides frames that allow freedoms to unfold is very important, and we have to keep this message strong as possible. Thanks.
Thank you so very much. We have time for just one more question. I open the floor to, I believe in Zoom, we have a question from Cornelius Holtrup. Would you like to turn on your video and maybe ask the question?
Yes, thank you very much. Great opportunity. Thanks for this wonderful opportunity to discuss all these important issues. The question I asked is a little bit back here in the chat, which you may have seen, that sometimes I feel that in these campaigns and in these efforts to get heritage on the agenda, we forget that we cannot always take for granted that heritage is always part of the solution. It seems sometimes that we have the answer and then we wait what the question will be. And so we're ready to shoot. And I'm not necessarily saying it's all wrong, but I think we need a bit more a critical attitude to first establish exactly what is the contribution that heritage in different circumstances can make to any of the SDGs, really. And I'm sure there's a lot of scope. But the research to a large extent hasn't been done. There's a lot of proclaiming, there's a lot of good intentions, there are some case studies, anecdotal evidence, all sorts of things like that. But I think what we really should be pushing for is systematic evaluation of how heritage actually can make contributions to any of the specific SDGs and the various indicators and so on the ground. And I think this is one of the main obstacles why it has been difficult to get the ear of the big decision makers in politics, because they have some doubts that we can actually deliver on our promises. And I think this would be an aim that would ultimately strengthen our case. If we could say, well, maybe in a few areas we couldn't really deliver what we wanted to, but in other areas we really can, and maybe much more so. And I think this will ultimately help us, rather than saying that we have the answer to everything all the time. So and maybe that's because I'm working at the university. I'm pushing for more research and critical assessments of the strengths of heritage in society. That's it. Thank you very much. Again, if you want to respond.
I love this about Cornelius. He's very subversive, but we need people like you. So thank you for your question. Actually, it is a valid concern that also came up in the SDGs policy guidance work that we are doing at ICOMOS, and Linda knows about this. And Sophia, our colleague in that task team, is very sensitive to this topic. Sometimes culture and cultural heritage are not necessarily aligned with sustainable development goals. For example, gender, how women have been treated culturally, traditionally. It's true that we need to be open to criticism and open to change. And as much as tangible heritage are often fixed buildings, cultural heritage is often also evolving. Practices can change, or use or interpretation can change. We're going through this with Black Lives Matter, for example, the whole reinterpretation of colonial heritage, let's say. And that adaptability, flexibility is key for culture to stay relevant. We don't want to be an obstacle in the way of social welfare and progress. So we are supposed to be, a soft power to support this. So that's how I suppose one of our jobs is to interpret cultural heritage in ways that are critical and be ready for the change that's needed sometimes in maybe making some compromises. I don't want to say something dangerous here, but not be too orthodox, or see the bigger picture and see the bigger value to preserve, rather than be stuck on certain specifics of it. You know, there are different strategies. And what else did you say, Cornelius, about?
A lot of things, but I think that was a good reply already. I think we should always see, and that's what you said, I think that cultural heritage is a means to achieve something great in society, rather than the other way around. It's not the task of society to protect the heritage.
Or maybe to remember some things that are negative heritage. Oh, this is also a big topic in World Heritage as well. And sometimes you need to keep the lessons learned, not necessarily to enjoy the beauty, or but to acknowledge that these things happened and there's a dark side of human history, and use it for a better future. That's a slogan, but any other comments?
Thank you so very much. Unfortunately, we're kind of sort of out of time and over time, but thank you so very much. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to our coordinators. Thank you to the participants for your questions. It's pushing us. That's very, very good. We appreciate that. We will have another webinar on the 17th of October. We'll be sharing that information on Facebook and Twitter and all the other social media outlets there are. And we will look forward to having you join us again for our second webinar. This is a series of 5, and we look forward to your participation, your questions, and see you in a couple of weeks.